Loose Jeans Reviews. My name is Alyssa, and this is my review for Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. This is a part of a series of monthly videos in which I will be reviewing each of the original 6 Star Trek films, 1 month at a time. So last month I did the motion picture. This month I am doing Star Trek 2, and of course next month will be Star Trek 3, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Here we are to talk about Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan, often credited as the best Star Trek film in the franchise, and also the film that really saved the franchise, that we wouldn't have Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, any of that stuff without this film. So Nicholas Meyer and Harve Bennett are credited with saving the franchise, and as they should be. This movie definitely saved the franchise, and this movie definitely is the best in the franchise. There's nothing that comes close. I'm sorry, it's ridiculous that Star Trek 2009 has a higher rating on IMDb than this. It's in Rotten Tomatoes. It's kind of ridiculous. So does Star Trek First Contact, I think. If I recall correctly. It's ridiculous. Ridiculous. Easily the best film, and it's not even close. And it is a film that 2 other Star Trek films tried to imitate and failed spectacularly. And many other films tried to imitate it. And I just rewatched it, obviously, for this review. And I will tell you, though I had not seen it in a little while, it still holds. It is still the best Star Trek film by far. And even, the visuals still hold. I mean, the visual effects are 40 years out of date. Obviously, we've made a lot of technological progress when it comes to visual effects. But nothing really stands out as, oh my god, that's so cheesy, and really takes you out of the story because you're so distracted by how ridiculous something looks, such as you will often see in the original series from the 60s. Here, sure, the visual effects are 40 years behind our current technology, but there's nothing so ridiculous that it kind of just takes you out of the story. It still holds up. So I'm going to go through this film scene by scene, as I did for the motion picture, and as I will do every month, from the beginning to the end. And then at the end of all of that, I will give my rating out of 10. So let's go ahead and dive into this film. Okay, so I'm actually going to start this review as I did last month with the opening credits, because this is a notable improvement over the opening credits of the motion picture. As I said in my review for that film, the credits were really boring. They were just over this black screen. Here, they did the right thing and had the credits rolling over outer space with the stars moving. And it doesn't even take that much. They definitely had that technology in 1979 to do that, and they just didn't. And the opening theme is much better. It's much more cinematic. Now, a lot of that may have to do with the fact that the opening theme of the motion picture eventually became the opening theme of The Next Generation. So now when I watch it, I just think of The Next Generation, and it doesn't feel very cinematic to me. That probably has a lot to do with my perception of it. But this opening theme is one of the classic themes for me in all the films. It's John Williams was the composer, I believe, and he did a lot of those classic films. And this to me is up there with one of those ultimate classic themes. I would put it up there with Superman and even Star Wars. It's just really evokes the emotions that the film evokes. And it really evokes the characters. It's just so perfect for this film. The music in this film is top notch. So opening credits, big improvement over the motion picture, just as everything else in this film would be. Now let's get into the film itself. Now we open up with the Kobayashi Maru test. And you know what? At the time that I first saw this film, I never would have imagined that the Kobayashi Maru would become such a big deal that 40 years later, two Star Trek series in this past year, in the past few months, had an episode that either was completely about or heavily referenced the Kobayashi Maru test, and the episodes were both named after that test. There's an episode of Discovery called the Kobayashi Maru, and then an episode of Prodigy just called Kobayashi, although arguably the episode of Prodigy more deserved to be called Kobayashi Maru, but I guess they were late to the bus, and so they had to just call it Kobayashi. But anyways, like, I had no idea that it would become such a huge deal. 40 years later, they're still making episodes about it. And frankly, I don't know that it deserves to be that huge of a deal. But it is. And doing this rewatch of this film, I had actually forgotten all about the fact that the movie opens with the Kobayashi Maru. Of course, I knew it was in it. I can't forget the Kobayashi Maru exists. As I said, they always bring it back again. But I had forgotten that it was the opening scene, and they did that fake out where you're wondering, well, why is this weird Savick person the captain? And oh my God, did Sulu and McCoy and Uhura just die? But they were acting. It was merely a simulation, as it is quickly revealed. I had forgotten all about that fake out. I'd forgotten that that's how they started the movie. And this clearly shows that there is no holodeck technology yet, because they're using this simulation room and they're using real people like McCoy and Sulu and Hora to do some acting and pretend to be dead, rather than just simply using holographic simulations, which proves once again that it is total bullshit when Paramount Plus tries to now say that the animated series is canon. The hell it is, because the animated series had a fucking holodeck. There was a holodeck in an episode of the second season of the animated series, although they called it the rec room. It wasn't called a holodeck, but it was essentially the same thing. And the fact that they don't have that in this movie means that the animated series is not canon, and it's bullshit that they try to say it is. But anyways, that is a complete side plot. So we get to the introduction of Savick, played by Kirstie Alley, and in the credits it actually says introducing Kirstie Alley as Savick. So I guess she wasn't wasn't known before this. Yeah, I certainly didn't know who she was back in 1982. All throughout this movie, Savick is just obsessed with the Kobayashi Maru. Like, pretty much anytime she opens her mouth to say anything, she'll bring it back around to, hey, by the way, so about this Kobayashi Maru, what is that all about? Like, what is it? What is it? Captain Kirk, how did you do on it? Like, she keeps bringing it up over and over and over and over throughout the whole movie. Literally every time she has any lines, she always brings it back to the Kobayashi Maru. She is obsessed with it. I'll talk about that a little bit more a little later on. Moving on, then we have these scenes between Kirk and Spock, and then Kirk and McCoy, where it's Kirk's birthday. And right away, we're already doing something that the first film did not do, which is really delving into what was the heart of the original series, the relationships between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And in this case, they're doing it separate. First Kirk and Spock, and then Kirk and McCoy. The Kirk and Spock gives him the book, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, I guess, The Tale of Two Cities. I think this would have been the time to introduce the line, I have been and always shall be your friend, because they wanted to prime the audience for that line, so they do have Spock say that line to Kirk prior to the dramatic ending, but they do it in a different scene, and I'll get to that later. I thought it would have been more suited here, it would have made more sense here, whereas where they did use it seemed random and out of place. But nevertheless, these were good scenes to remind us why we love the original series in the first place, is the dynamics between these three characters. And now let's move on to the Botany Bay. Botany Bay! Oh no! So we have Chekhov now being the first officer of the USS Reliant, and the late great Paul Winfield. I think he's late, isn't he? I thought I remember right. I hope I'm not misspeaking. I thought I remember him dying. Am I wrong about that? Maybe I should have Googled that before I came on. Anyways, Paul Winfield as Captain Terrell, and Walter Koenig, of course, reprising his role as Chekhov, who is now the first officer. And they go down to what they think is SETI Alpha 6. Turns out it's SETI Alpha 5. And, oh no! It's Khan. And thus we get one of the most infamous plot holes in all of Star Trek, and is one that I noticed pretty much as soon as I saw Space Seed. I think I first saw this film prior to having seen Space Seed. But the first time that I did actually watch Space Seed, and I still would have been a very young kid, I was like, hey, Chekhov isn't in this. What the hell? So you got, of course, Khan saying, I never forget a face. Even one I've never actually seen before. Because Chekhov wasn't on the show yet when Khan first appeared in the episode Space Seed. And it's interesting that apparently this happened because Nicholas Meyer didn't know about it. Harv Bennett didn't know about it. They just escaped him. They didn't remember that Chekhov actually wasn't on the show yet. And Ricardo Montalban himself didn't even remember that Chekhov wasn't on the show in his first appearance. He thought Chekhov was totally there. The one person who did catch the error was Walter Koenig. He was like, hey, I wasn't on this show when they did this episode. I'm not going to say anything. See, he was worried that his role would be reduced in the film because they would replace Chekhov with someone else who actually was in Space Seed, and then maybe he would have a lesser role. And actually, I think that's a legitimate concern. That probably is what would have happened. So he's like, yeah, I'm just not gonna say anything. We'll just let this go. Who cares? Whatever. Of course, you can try to say, oh, well, Chekhov was actually on Enterprise. He was just off screen somewhere, and Khan saw him off screen, which would be total bullshit, but, you know, whatever. Obviously does not ruin the film. It's just a pretty hilarious plot hole. Okay, so then after a few melodramatic exchanges between Khan and Chekhov, where Khan says things like, Admiral! Kirk! And then we get to the creepy earworm part. Okay, so I was 8 years old when I first saw this. I'm sorry, but those worms in the ear that control your brain, that freaked me the fuck out. It was traumatized me for a while. In fact, I had this weird thing with worms where I was freaked out by them. I didn't like to see worms in real life, and I was always having nightmares about them. And largely this has to do with this movie. Now, I know technically they're not worms. They're just alien thing. But to me, they were worms. That, and then in Poltergeist 2, when Craig T. Nelson drinks the tequila and there's a worm at the bottom of it, and he drinks the worm, and that also controls his mind. That also freaks me out. Worms get in your brain and wrap around your brain and control your mind. Ah! What is not to be freaked out about that? Like, how can my parents do this to me? Take me to this movie when I was 8 years old. Actually, I'm very grateful they did, because I love this movie. But that creeped me the fuck out. And let me just tell you right now, it traumatized me for a long time. I'm over it now. You know, that was like 40 years ago. I'm over it now. But it fucked me up for a while, like worms in the ears. Anyway, so we get that whole thing. One more thing on the Reliant. I have to mention this. So on the Reliant, we have this officer up on the Reliant calling down, Captain Terrell, Commander Chekhov, do you read? Captain Terrell, Commander Chekhov, do you read me? And then I hear that officer identify himself as Commander Kyle. And I was like, wait, is that Mr. Kyle? And then I looked it up, and it is Mr. Kyle. Oh my god, I didn't know Mr. Kyle was in this movie. Why didn't anyone ever tell me Mr. Kyle was in this movie? Because nobody ever pays attention to Mr. Kyle. Mr. Kyle is my absolute favorite red shirt on TOS. And actually, he's not really a red shirt because he never dies. He was basically the equivalent of Chief O'Brien on the original series, except he had fewer lines. He did have some lines, though. Arguably, he had as many lines as George Takei in the second season, probably. He might be most noted for the Mirror Universe version of himself in the episode Mirror Mirror, is the guy who is at the transporter controls when Kirk and Horror and all those people come over to the Mirror Universe, and there's a little glitch in the transporter, and evil Spock goes up to him and goes, "Due to your error, Mr. Kyle," and Mr. Kyle goes, "No, Mr. Spock, no," and then he uses the agonizer. "Your agonizer, please, Mr. Kyle." We're introduced to the agonizer, and then we get the whole dun 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 dun, dun and the whole introduction to the Mirror Universe. But that's what I remember most for. But during my rewatch of Star Trek, I noticed he's in a lot of episodes. There was one where he saves the damn ship. I think it was the Doomsday Machine, if I remember correctly. Like, he does some fancy transporting, gets Kirk out of there, and the Enterprise is able to escape. And I'm like, Mr. Kyle, the unsung hero of this episode. But nobody ever gives Mr. Kyle any credit. So I was so happy to see Mr. Kyle in this movie. I had no idea he was in it. Anyways, I've spent way too much time talking about Mr. Kyle, so let's move on. All right, then we get to, this sequence of events with Chekhov calling Dr. Marcus and telling her that we're coming for the Genesis because Chekhov has been brainwashed by the creepy earworms. Brainworms. Anyways, so Dr. Marcus calls Kirk, and then Khan is apparently jamming the signal. And okay, so I know I said before that visually this holds up, but there are parts of it that are very 1980s. When Dr. Marcus is trying to call Kirk, I was like, just hit your TV. Just that's what you do in the 80s. You hit the TV. Like, you're getting bad reception, Kirk. Mess with the antenna or something. So this then leads to Kirk calling Starfleet, and Starfleet saying, hey, you guys need to go investigate this. And I actually had forgotten before this rewatch all about the fact that this was supposed to be just this training cruise with a bunch of cadets. But Savick is apparently a lieutenant. I was always confused by that. But everyone else are cadets. And they're doing this training cruise, which ends up turning into a mission because they're the closest ship to go investigate what is happening there. This leads to Spock telling Kirk that he needs to take command. And unlike what he did in the motion picture, Kirk is not imposing himself on the captain, because this time the captain is the main character. But Spock implores him to take it. He's like, I have no ego to bruise. So just you should be in charge here. And this is where we kind of get the introduction of the lines that Spock would use at the end of the movie. The whole, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. And then this is also, as I mentioned earlier, where Spock tells Kirk, have been and always shall be your friend. Here it just seemed kind of shoehorned in to say, oh, this is going to be important later in the movie. Like, it didn't feel natural that he would say that to him. It would have made a lot more sense if he said this to him for his birthday, when he was giving him the birthday gift. But, minor complaint. Then that would eventually lead into a couple scenes later, Kirk showing Spock and McCoy the secret of Genesis, and he has to do the little 1980s retinal scan to prove that he has the security for it. They watch this top secret video about the Genesis. And then we get a scene that is very, very reminiscent of the old TOS, with McCoy going, "Damn it, Spock, you green-blooded Vulcan!" And you know what? After doing my rewatch of the original series, I gotta say that got old for me. Like, it was just kind of repetitive. And sometimes McCoy, there were a couple episodes where McCoy was just an outright dick to Spock for no reason. Um, but you know what? I kind of really enjoyed it here. And I think that, again, uh, this film was doing something the original motion picture did not, which is really bringing back the dynamics of these three characters and why everyone loved the show. So you know what? I really enjoyed watching it here, even though when I did my original series rewatch, it did kind of get a bit old. We also get a scene on the Reliant with Khan that actually takes place in between those two scenes that I just mentioned. But I was already talking about Kirk and Spock, so I just kind of rolled with it. But there's another scene on the Reliant where that first in command dude, second in command dude, who is the dude who would later be in the Next Generation episode Symbiosis with the guy who plays David. I remember when I first saw that episode Symbiosis, I was like, hey, why did they have two dudes from Star Trek The Wrath of Khan in here? But anyways, that dude, the dude who would be in Symbiosis, he goes up to Khan and is like, hey, we've got everything we need. We've got the information for the Genesis. We've got our own ship. You know, you don't need to go after Kirk. You don't need to get your revenge. And this is the first of many great lines from Khan. And before I recite it, I have to say that though William Shatner is known for overacting, and he definitely does in this film, as my little intro to this video demonstrates, I think Ricardo Montalban is the king of overacting in this movie, but I love it. Like, his overacting is fantastic because it really emphasizes just how obsessed Khan is. So, watching it, I both laugh and really, really enjoy it at the same time. But he has this line that I almost wondered, did Ricardo Montalban just like improv it? Because it just seems sort of like he's just rambling off a bunch of nonsense. I don't even know what it means. So when this dude, tells him, oh, we don't have to go after Kirk, he Khan goes on this rant like, I'll chase him around the moons of Nebula, and around the Notorious Maelstrom, and around the Ditchion Flames before I give him up. I know what the Ditchion Flames means. What does that mean? I feel like Ricardo Montalban just was spewing out nonsense words, but they got on camera. I was like, that is perfect. Let us roll with that. What is the Notorious Maelstrom? What is that? Who cares? Because the delivery was fantastic. Is it overacting? Yes, but it's just fantastic. It really, really emphasizes just how kind of insane Khan is and how obsessed he is with Kirk. So I absolutely loved it. And then he also throws out the Klingon proverb. There's an old Klingon proverb. Revenge is a dish best served cold. Yes, quoted by the great Kalis back in the ancient Klingon times. Revenge is a dish best served cold. How would Khan even know about Klingon proverbs? He was stuck on SETI Alpha 5. First he came from the 20th century, and then he was on SETI Alpha 5. Did they have books about anyways, let's not get into it too much here. So we get that first encounter with Khan and the Enterprise. It's very exciting. A lot of tension that just really builds up. The polar opposite of the ending of the motion picture, when the whole Earth was at stake and there was absolutely no tension. Here we are, barely in the middle of the film, and already there's more tension than that. Because there's this ship, the Reliant, that supposedly is on their side. Kirk doesn't know any different. They're just wondering, why is the ship not answering him? And I just love the tension that is built up here. And then at first it does appear that Khan has Kirk defeated. Already halfway through the movie, Kirk is already in big trouble. And I just love how Kirk outsmarts Khan. There's a lot of battle of wits all throughout this film, which is one thing that makes this film really great. And Kirk, he's kind of the man in this movie. I don't always love Kirk as a character, but he's kind of badass in this movie. How he continues to outsmart Khan. And in this place, he's like, "Oh yeah, so we're gonna send you the files on Genesis. Hold on a second, it's coming right now. Hold on." And Khan goes, Admiral, time is a luxury you do not have." And then, oh, okay, here it is. Boop. And then their shields go down and they fire on them. And it is freaking badass. And I love it. The only thing that was weird to me is at the very end of the scene, Scotty comes onto the bridge holding that injured guy who ends up dying, who we met at the beginning of the movie. Why did he take him to the bridge? Why would you not go to sickbay? But, a minor thing. Okay, and then a little bit later in the movie, we get the scene where Kirk, McCoy, and Saavik end up down in that underground station with Dr. Marcus and the other Dr. Marcus, David Marcus, Kirk's son. And Khan gets the upper hand here. This is where he beams away the Genesis weapon, and it looks like he really has Kirk in a bind. And of course, this is where he says the line, "I'll leave you like you left me, buried alive, buried alive," which leads to the famous Kirk overacting scene, which I recreated for you at the beginning of this video. I'm not going to do it again. I only do one Khan per video. And I would say this is not only William Shatner overacting, but this is Admiral Kirk overacting. He was laying it on a little thick because, as you come to find out a little bit later, he knew perfectly well that he was totally fine and that Spock would be there in 2 hours. So there's absolutely no reason for him to go, "Khan!" Okay, I guess I lied. I did the second one. There's no reason for him to do that because he knew perfectly well that they were fine. So little bit of overacting, not just on William Shatner's part, but Admiral Kirk, the character, was overacting there, laying it on a little thick. But I guess it worked. It fooled Khan. Then we get a couple scenes between Kirk and Carol Marcus, and during this rewatch, I had forgotten the fact that Kirk already knew that he was David's father, and David already knew he was his father. This wasn't new. I was thinking like he finds out in this movie, but he already knew. He just wasn't a part of his life. And then they go into that Genesis cave, which I'm sure looked fantastic in 1982. This is something that, maybe this is one of the scenes where it was like, okay, well, not as fantastic as it used to be, but it gets the point across. And this is where Saavik again is bringing up the Kobayashi Maru. She keeps harping on it. She cannot let it go. I thought she was supposed to have no emotions. And we get the reveal here that Kirk cheated. He never actually faced death, despite his speech to Saavik earlier in the film, where he says, "Has it ever occurred to you that you might need to know how to face death?" When in fact, he never had until the end of this movie. And jumping ahead a little bit, but there is a great conversation between David and he at the end of the film talking about how he's facing death. It's really great character development for Kirk. Not typically a lot of character development happens for this character, if I'm being perfectly honest, especially in the original series, but really great character development for Admiral Kirk throughout this film. And then we get the reveal that they were playing possum, and that the Kirk and Spock had exchanged this code that there were hours instead of days. And when they originally said that, Spock starts the sentence with, "As Saavik says from the book, the days mean hours," or something along those lines. And I feel like Khan would have been smart enough to pick up on that. Like, I don't know. It seemed pretty obvious. When you go back and hear it again, it's like, yeah, that's pretty obvious. They're talking about a code. But in any event, get the big exciting reveal. Music starts picking up. Da, na, 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 and we start building toward the climax, the extraordinarily exciting climax. And this time I am not being sarcastic as I was from my motion picture review. This is for real. Okay, so in that final scene there, Kirk at first is trying to lure Khan into this nebula. That's part of his plan. And I love how he goads Khan into going into the nebula, where he's just like, oh, Khan, I laugh at your superior intellect. And Khan is just like, we must go into the nebula, full impels power. And again, that one dude from the Next Generation episode Symbiosis is like, no, sir, we can't do that. He's like, full impulse power. But Kirk knew exactly what he was doing. Now, Khan is really smart. And I don't think that they're just saying that. I think he shows that throughout this film. But his downfall is he gets way too emotional. He lets his emotions take over, and he's just way too obsessed with revenge. And then we get arguably the best cat and mouse space chase ever, where both ships are kind of floating in the nebula. They can't go warp drive. They can't have shields. They don't see each other. They're just kind of guessing at shooting the phasers and the photon torpedoes, and it is so intense. Again, the exact polar opposite of the lack of tension in the motion picture. This is one of the most intense space scenes in history of film and television, in my opinion. And Kirk ends up getting the upper hand again. However, Khan does get one last blow in, where this is where he's all deformed and stuff, and he's quoting Moby Dick, "From hell's heart I stab at thee." Again, way overacting, but I love it. Love the overacting. It is classic. And this leads to one of the most tear-inducing scenes in all of cinematic history. And it doesn't matter that I know perfectly well that he's going to come back in the next damn movie. I've seen Star Trek 3 and 4, so I know he's coming back. It doesn't matter, as tears are still going down my eyes, because it's just such a powerful and emotional scene, and it always will be. I would put this up there with Charlie's death in Lost as two of the most powerful death scenes in all of television or film. And it's interesting because both of them involve somebody putting their hand up on a glass. But I don't think that's what makes it powerful. I think it's just a coincidence. But both very, very, very powerful scenes. Now, I have to point out, I did allude to this at the beginning of this video, that several films have tried to imitate this and failed, and 2 Star Trek films tried to imitate this and failed spectacularly. The first one was Star Trek Nemesis, that tried to do the Next Generation version of this and tried to have this clone of Picard play the Khan role, except that nobody gives a shit about this clone of Picard, and you couldn't buy for a second that he even was a clone of Picard because it was Tom Hardy, didn't look anything like Patrick Stewart. Couldn't buy that it was really a Picard clone, and I didn't care about this character, and it was awful. And they tried to give you this Data sacrificing himself scene that was supposed to be like Spock sacrificing himself. It's an insult to this movie because I felt nothing. I felt nothing in that scene. The true emotional Data goodbye actually happened at the end of season 1 of Star Trek Picard. Now that gave me tears. Nemesis did nothing for me. It was just a blatant ripoff of this film, The Wrath of Khan. And then, of course, we have Star Trek Into Darkness. Well, overall, I actually liked this movie better than 2009. I thought the 2009 film was just a piece of shit, and I do not understand why people have been brainwashed into thinking this is a quality film when it objectively is not. But anyways, Into Darkness, overall, I actually liked better, but the ending where they was it even the end? I don't remember. Toward the end, where they tried to do the reverse Wrath of Khan with Spock being the one who's upset about Kirk dying and Spock being way too emotional. I'm sorry, I didn't like Zachary Quinto as Spock. He's way too emotional. He's not Spock. So, again, failed miserably at trying to recreate this film that just cannot be duplicated. They just need to stop trying to duplicate it. You can't duplicate Wrath of Khan. You cannot duplicate perfection. And this film surely is. Okay, here's the part where I give my rating for the film out of 10. 1 being the lowest possible score, 10 being the highest possible score, and my rating for Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan is, of course, a 10. Still the best Star Trek film ever made, and one of the best films, period, ever made. It still holds up. I don't know how much of it's nostalgia and how much of it is I would still love this film if I was seeing it for the first time now. But who cares? It is still a truly great film. The overacting works beautifully for this revenge plot, and actually get some character growth for Kirk. And it's great to see the dynamics between the characters again that was sorely lacking in the first film, and the tension that was sorely lacking in the first film. This is one of the most intense endings of any Star Trek film. An absolute masterpiece, and it holds at a 10. Anyways, thank you so much for staying with me for this review. You can join me, well, first of all, you can join me weekly now for my Star Trek Discovery reviews, which will bleed into my Star Trek Picard reviews, so check out my channel for that. Also, if you're interested in my transition, I do monthly videos talking about my transition. Now, as far as this series of videos, I will be back in the month of March 2022 to talk about how a Klingon bastard killed Kirk's son. So that will be coming up next month sometime, Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. Until then, have a good time, everybody. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.